She stood in a green gown as her mate claimed another woman before 1,000 witnesses. He never looked for her. She didn't cry. She walked for 3 years. She built his kingdom under his name. Every alliance, every treaty sealed in wax by her hand. Now the brother of his new bride wanted her erased from 2 kingdoms. She set the silver moon clasp on the cold stone railing and never looked back. Across the border, a rival alpha king read her work without interrupting. He spoke her name in his own council. He never put his name on a thing she made: forged seals, burning stores, wolves howling at the gate, the man who broke her riding through the mud, hat in hand. Everyone underestimated the woman who walked out in the dark. You cannot steal what someone has woven into the bones of a place. Pine smoke, wild honey. Those 2 smells had meant home to her for every autumn she could remember, and tonight they rose off the festival fires into a sky gone black and brittle, with the first real cold of the season. Celine stood at the rim of the celebration, 24 years old. Holding a cup of wine she had no plan to drink, she held a smile too. The careful kind. The kind you keep on your face the way you hold a door, for someone whose arms are full, patiently, and without ever being thanked for it. Something was wrong. She had known it for a week, maybe longer, and she hated the knowing, because seeing things early was the one talent she was supposed to own. It was her whole shape in this pack. The woman who saw it coming. The one who read a room before the room understood it was being read. Yet here she stood, having read every chamber in Blackthorn for 3 years, blind to the one with her own name written across it. Cor had grown distant. Not the distance of a man buried in his duties. She knew that man, had learned the grammar of his silences, which ones meant a poor harvest, and which meant a border quarrel, and which meant come closer. I only can't say so out loud. This silence belonged to a different species. It was colder, and it had a decision living inside it, a thing already chosen and merely waiting for a stage grand enough to announce itself on. The first sign had been his hand, the way it used to drift toward hers across the breakfast table without either of them looking, until one ordinary morning it simply stopped, and she had told herself he was tired. The next morning, that he was worried about the Eastern talks. By the 3rd, she had stopped telling herself anything, which was its own loud answer, if she had been brave enough to hear it. A torch snapped in the wind. A child laughed somewhere and was gently hushed. Her wolf had known before her mind caught up. That low, restless pacing under her ribs. For days now, an animal circling a cage she kept insisting was not a cage. She had named it nerves. She had named it the turning season. She had named it everything except its real name, which was warning. So when the crowd shifted, she felt it before she understood it. 1,000 bodies turning at once toward the center of the courtyard, shoulders rotating, the laughter dropping half a note, the way laughter always does when something solemn walks into the firelight. Cor climbed onto the stone platform, and the goddess help her, he was magnificent. She had never once stopped knowing that. He stood the way a mountain stands, as though the ground had been poured around him on purpose, his ceremonial cloak of black wolf fur sliding off his shoulders, the silver thread along its edge catching flame from the torches. He was not alone. The woman beside him wore white at the moon festival, cut in the style of the claiming ceremony. Ivory silk that had meant one thing for as long as the pack had names, and Celine knew the meaning down to the last stitch, because she had spent 3 years learning every custom this pack owned. Knowledge is the architecture of power. She had built her entire life on that single sentence, and now the architecture was coming down on her skull, and she had drafted the blueprints herself, the wine tilted in her cup. She righted it without thinking. Some buried, practical animal part of her, steadying the cup, while the rest of her watched the floor of her life fall away. The bride was young. A year, perhaps 2, beneath Celine's own age, fair hair pinned with small white blossoms, smiling up at Cor with the total, polished certainty of a woman who has already been told exactly how the night will end and has practiced her joy in a mirror. Her name was Isolde. Celine would learn that afterward. She would learn a great many things afterward. The musicians stopped. Even the torches seemed to hold their breath, that low hiss of flame the only sound left in the world, and beneath it her own heartbeat, slow, steady, almost insultingly composed, as though her body had decided that if this had to happen, it would at least happen with her dignity intact. She waited for him to look for her. That would be the part she could never quite forgive. Not the betrayal itself, the geometry of it. Because she stood 20 feet from that platform in a deep green gown with her red hair loose down her back, the most findable woman in the entire courtyard, and he had told her once, laughing, his mouth pressed to her hair, that he could find her in any crowd alive. by the color, by the set of her shoulders. He had called it a gift, so she waited, and gave him the chance and went on giving it. He raised his hand, the gesture of an alpha calling his pack to heel, one she had watched 100 times and taught herself to admire. "The moon calls us to honor what is true," he said, his voice filling the courtyard the way water fills whatever vessel you pour it into. "Tonight, before my pack and before the goddess. I claim what is mine." He still had not looked. He turned to Isolde, lifted her chin with 2 fingers, and the gentleness of it was the true blade, that small, practiced tenderness, worn smooth by repetition, 'cause no one becomes that fluent at touching a person in a single week. You become that fluent across months, across a whole secret season of months that had unspooled beneath Celine's nose, while she balanced the trade ledgers, and kept the borders quiet, and built the very kingdom he now stood atop to kiss someone else. He lowered his head. He bit down on the curve of the girl's neck, the claiming bite, and the courtyard exploded into joy. She did not cry. She had always assumed she would. Everyone assumes that. You imagine the worst night of your life, and you cast yourself as someone who shatters beautifully, whose grief is loud enough to be witnessed and remembered. But the tears refused to come. What came instead was a clean white heat down the center of her chest, surgical and exact, as if a blade had been laid flat against her breastbone and drawn one careful line. Not a stab, a crack. There is a difference, and she would spend a long time learning it, because a stab is a thing that closes and a crack is a thing that keeps traveling. She felt the bond go. The real one. The cord the goddess had witnessed 3 years before, when she first took his mark, the line of it strung between her ribs and his, and Cor had not spoken the words of release, had not come to her, had not summoned the decency or the courage to end the old thing before he began the new. He had simply claimed another and left their bond dangling in the air between them, still attached, still bleeding at the torn edge. The cruelest wound there is, the kind that cannot heal, because healing takes 2 hands and he had already given both of his to someone else. And here is what none of those cheering wolves understood as they howled their delight. Every alliance keeping this pack fed through the killing months. Hers. Every trade route threading grain across the high passes before the snows sealed them. Hers. Every treaty filling the blackthorn coffers. Every letter sent out under Cor's seal in Cor's name, with Cor's authority stamped into the wax. Hers. Pressed into that wax by her own hand, because the world they lived in demanded a woman do her work under a man's name and call the bargain fair. She had called it fair for 3 years because she had loved him, and love had whispered that the credit did not matter so long as the work got done. Love, it turned out, kept a terrible set of books. Around her, the celebration roared on, and the cold, clear part of her brain, the part that never fully shut off, watched the precise instant the wolves nearest her registered where she was standing. Eyes cutting toward her, then away. That sideways mercy of people who have just realized they are standing inside someone else's worst memory and would very much like to step out of it. Older she-wolves going still, faces closing like shutters before a storm. No one spoke to her. No one knew what to do with her. She knew what to do. She was always the one who knew what to do, and she would lean on that now the way you lean on a wall in a lightless room. She reached up and unpinned the silver clasp from her hair. A crescent moon in hammered silver. Fine work, the kind a craftsman pours his hours into. Cor had pressed it into her palm the night he first named her his Luna, both his hands folded around her one, his forehead bent to hers, his voice gone low and certain. The only woman who will ever stand at my side. She had believed him, of course she had, because she was the sort of woman who believed things, being honest herself and assuming it in others, and that sort always pays for the assumption. Eventually, in full, she held the clasp one breath longer. Then she set it down on the cold stone railing beside her gently, the way you put down something that has stopped being yours to carry. She did not run. She had never run from anything, not once in her life, and she would not begin tonight. In front of a pack that had called her Luna for 3 years, and would spend the next month deciding, in low voices over their fences, which version of this night to tell their children. So she walked, spine drawn straight as a plumb line. Chin level with the far horizon, her steps even as a dripping clock, and the celebrating crowd parted around her in a ripple of small, startled flinches. People stepping back without deciding to, answering something in the way she carried herself. A thing that spoke in a language older than speech. This is not a woman breaking, it said. This is a woman leaving. They are not the same, and you should be glad you only have to witness the second. The night air struck her past the gate like a flat palm against the breastbone. She drew it in, once, twice, Her wolf surged up beneath her skin, aching to keen, wanting to circle and mourn, and she set a firm inward hand on its neck. Not yet, not here. Grief was a private matter, and she would be damned before she handed these people a performance of it to gnaw on through the winter. She walked to the stables. Ash was in the third stall, gray roan, warm-breathed in the dark, ears swiveling toward the sound of her. Celine saddled the mare by feel, her fingers moving through motions worn so deep into the muscle that they needed no light, and she noticed almost clinically that her hands were steady. She had expected a tremor. There was none. Interesting, she thought, in the flat internal voice she used for problems not yet hers to solve. The body keeps secrets the heart is still arguing over. Then she crouched and reached beneath the straw. Oilskin. A satchel wrapped inside it. She had hidden it there 6 months earlier. That was the detail that would unsettle people later, when the story made its rounds. Not that she had left, but that she had been ready to. Because she had not foreseen this exact night. She had not sat in the dark rehearsing of betrayal yet to come. She had simply, somewhere across the last year, begun making quiet arrangements, the way a person does when she loves someone with her whole chest, and also, in the locked back room of herself, understands that love with no door out of it is only a slower manner of disappearing. The satchel held all of it. Copies of every map, every trade agreement in her own hand, every alliance letter, every contact, every location, every term she had ever bargained for. 3 years of a pack's working mind distilled down to a leather bag, a gray mare, and an open gate. But there was one thing more. One thing the bag could not hold, because it could not be folded into leather. The mountain pass. The single richest route Blackthorn owned, the artery that carried the whole pack through winter. And Cor believed, she was certain he believed, that the pass belonged to him. To the office of the Alpha. To Blackthorn, it did not. The pass had lain dead for 20 years before she came to it. Choked with ice and old grudges, ruled by 4 independent clans who trusted no pack, no banner, no seal. She had reopened it. Not Blackthorn, her. 2 years of private letters and personal favors and trust built one slow conversation at a time, until 4 clan leaders who had never once spoken Cor's name would move grain for the woman who remembered their children and kept her word in a world that mostly did not. They did not deal with the pack. They dealt with her. So the most valuable possession in all of Blackthorn was about to ride north on a gray mare in the dark, and the Alpha, who had just claimed a stranger in front of 1,000 witnesses, had no notion that his own throat was leaving with her. She mounted. The festival light shrank behind the trees into a smear of gold, and she did not look back, which cost her far less than she had feared. And a thing costs you almost nothing only when it ended long before you found the courage to admit it had. She rode until the gold was gone, until there was nothing but darkened stars, and the steady drum of hooves on frozen ground, and then she rode further still, because she had always believed the only honest path through a thing was straight through the middle of it, and she had a long way to travel before morning could be trusted to bring anything but light. The river had no name. She had checked once, in the course of her work, the way she checked everything. Both packs had called it the Border River for so many generations that whatever it had first been named had simply dropped out of the world. She had found that grimly funny even then. 2 powers, each pretending on paper the other did not exist, and the one honest thing lying between them an unnamed water that cared nothing for either. She forded it at first light. The cold of it was not a temperature but an event. Snowmelt and stone, the breath punched clean from her lungs as the water climbed, Ash's belly and her own boots filled, and the festival gown, still that deep ruined green, dragged at her legs like a second drowning, trying to talk her into staying. The mare drove through it, found the far bank, hauled them both up onto the new ground with steam pouring off her flanks. Celine stopped there a moment and breathed. The sun was just prying itself off the tree line, a thin, cold seam of orange laid along the edge of the world, and the frost on the grass had caught it. Every blade lit up as though it held some small worth. Her wolf was still circling the severed cord beneath her ribs, mourning it the faithful, useless way a dog mourns a lost littermate, unable to mend a single thing. She set the same firm hand on it once more. "There is work to do," she told it. There would always be work to do. It was the truest sentence she owned about herself, and right then it was the only railing in the dark, so she gripped it with both hands. She rode 3 hours into the new territory before the scouts took her. They came out of the tree line without a whisper. 4 of them, broad men in dark leathers, moving with the practiced quiet of wolves who had spent their whole lives learning where to set their feet. They had her surrounded before she had done more than register the motion, and Ash flicked her ears hard but held her ground. Because the mare had been trained by a woman who did not panic, and animals learn that straight off your hands and into their own bones, Celine sat very still and looked at the one in front. Hazel eyes hard, his hand resting on his sword hilt but not yet drawn. She filed that at once. A man who draws on sight is afraid. A man who keeps the hand ready and the blade sheathed is calculating, doing arithmetic on you, and arithmetic she could work with. State, your name and your destiny. My name is Celine. I want an audience with your alpha. She let it sit a beat. Tell him I carry something worth his time. His eyes traveled over her. The soaked green hem, the tangled red hair, the leather satchel held against her side the way another woman might cradle a child. A lone she-wolf. Crossing the border at dawn. In a festival dress, his mouth did something that was not quite scorn. Not what we'd call a promising visitor. No, she agreed, but she-wolves in festival dresses don't usually cross your border carrying 3 years of a rival pack's trade intelligence. So you may want to widen your sample. Silence. A flick of a glance between the scouts, fast and minimal, the shorthand of men who have worked together long enough to speak without it. What pack? Blackthorn. A pause she made him sit inside. Former Blackthorn. As of last night, she watched the arithmetic run behind his eyes. The risk of her weighed against the value of her, the question of what an exiled Luna at the border at dawn actually meant, and whether bringing her in was the sort of thing a scout got promoted for, or quietly executed over. She let him run it all the way through. She had learned long ago that silence, spent with patience, was the loudest argument in any room. Dismount, he said at last, you'll come with us. The stronghold sat high on a ridge above a valley that took the morning light and did something almost tender with it. Dark stone. Great oak towers, gone silver with the years. A gate built for defense first, and for impression, a very distant second. And that single detail told her more than an hour of talk could have, because the man she had left had spent his father's whole inheritance making his hall look like power, while this place had not bothered. This place looked like it had finished proving things a long time ago, and moved on to the harder business of simply enduring. She catalogued all of it, the tireless part of her mind running its quiet inventory, while the rest of her held the cracked thing in her chest cupped in both hands, the way you carry a split vessel across a room. Slow, level, praying nothing spills before you reach a floor you can afford to spill on. They put her in a receiving room. A fire was already lit. She did not miss the deliberateness of that, the small hospitality that said, before a single word, you are a guest before you are a threat. Someone laid a dry cloak over the chair nearest the flames without being asked. Someone else brought a cup that turned out to be spiced cider with a low note of smoked honey beneath it, and she wrapped both hands around the warmth and felt it climb her arms, and she was grateful in a way that embarrassed her, because gratitude this large meant the bar had been set this low, and she had not even noticed it being lowered. Year by year, in a house she had thought was hers, she sat straight, she waited, near enough 20 minutes. Then the door opened. She felt him before she had a clear look. A change in the weight of the room, the way the air leans before weather turns. Then he stepped into the firelight, and she took her first real measure of Ridian, alpha of the pack that had caught her, and found he matched almost nothing she had once written about him in her old reports. He was dangerous, those reports had said, politically sharp, not to be underestimated, all likely true, but not one line of them had thought to mention that he carried the whole weight of it so quietly. Broad in the way that comes from use rather than ceremony. Dark hair, and gray-green eyes that held very still, the eyes of a man who watched a thing all the way through before he touched it. Plain dark wool, no ornament but a single iron ring. He looked like an alpha with nothing left to prove, which she understood at once made him the most dangerous kind there was. He crossed to the chair opposite and sat. No theater. None of the small dominance rituals she had watched performed on visitors in her former life. The manufactured lateness, the standing over, the engineered silence meant to remind you whose floor you stood on. He simply sat and looked at her and let the quiet be ordinary instead of a weapon. She held his eyes. She did not look away first. She had never looked away first in her life and saw no reason to surrender the habit to a stranger. You're the Blackthorn Luna. Not a question, I was. Something shifted in his face. Small, almost nothing. A recognition snapping shut on its own conclusion. Then tell me why you're sitting in my receiving room instead of standing at your mate's side. So she gave him the useful version. Not the clasp, not the sound the crowd had made, not the dark of the stable with her hands moving through the saddle motions because they needed a task that was not trembling. She told him what could be spent. That she had spent 3 years quietly building every advantage her former pack now enjoyed. That she had walked out the night before. That she had taken her work with her. Then she opened the satchel and laid it across the low table between them, because numbers argue better than grief ever has. Maps annotated in her small, precise ink. Agreements in her own hand. Route surveys she had commissioned through contacts paid out of household accounts no one had ever thought to examine. Letters under a seal she had pressed herself. He read without touching, his eyes moving fast, faster than she had braced for. A mind that worked at speed, cutting between documents, making connections she could watch land. Then he picked up the survey of the mountain pass and slowed all the way down, reading it with the focus of a man who has just found the one genuinely interesting object in a room full of ordinary ones. This is meticulous work. Yes, why should I trust it's accurate? You could be a plant, I could be. She did not blink. Ask me anything in those pages, any contact, any term, any figure, any route, any name. I wrote every word in that bag. He went quiet a moment. Then he asked her a question, specific, hard, the kind you only know to pose if you already hold enough to check the answer against. Which meant he was not testing whether she knew things. He was testing whether she would lie about the things he already knew. Cleverer than Core, came the thought. Unbidden, and she set it aside for later examination, she answered. The name, the date, 2 details he had not asked for, because she would rather over-deliver than be doubted twice. He asked 5 more across the next hour, each harder than the last, and she answered every one without a pause or a hedge, because she had done the work and knew it the way a surveyor knows the ground he himself walked. When she finished the last, he sat back and looked at her a long moment. Outside, the stronghold had come fully awake. Movement in the courtyard below, voices, the clean ring of metal from the direction of a smithy. It sounded like a place that knew exactly what it was doing and felt no need to be loud about it. What do you want? A place to work, a seat at a table where the decisions actually get made, a pack that will use what I give it instead of stamping its own name on it and calling it theirs, a breath, and time? Time for what? She held his eyes. To build something better than what I left, he studied her. Not the way men usually studied her, measuring her against some private ledger of what a woman ought to be, but the way she had just read those documents, looking for the structure underneath, for what held the thing upright. You can stay, he said, simple as setting down a cup. We'll negotiate terms in the morning. He stood, paused at the door, and without quite turning back. Whatever happened last night, it was his loss. That much is already plain. Then he was gone, before she could find a single thing to do with it. She sat alone, with the fire burning low, turning that last sentence over like a stone found in a riverbed, checking it for worth, and thinking about the 6 questions and how he had listened to each answer with the whole of his attention. Never flicking his eyes to read a courtier's reaction. Never wearing that half-absent look that had grown on Core's face this last year whenever she spoke. Such a small thing to be heard all the way to the end of a sentence. You would think at the floor, the minimum one person owes another. And she was 24 years old, only now working out that she had spent 3 years grateful for crumbs and calling the hunger a feast. Because no one had ever shown her the difference, and you cannot miss a thing you have never been permitted to see. That was what finally made her eyes sting, not the betrayal. The kindness arriving at the exact hour she had decided to expect none. The crack in her chest was still there, and would be for a long while. She was nobody's fool. But beneath it, something that had been starving by inches, at a breakfast table where a hand stopped reaching had, very quietly, stopped dying. The negotiation went faster than either of them had braced for. Black tea between them, the documents from the night before still fanned across the table, and Celine laying out what she wanted, with the calm of a woman who has stopped asking and started stating. A formal council seat, access to the full intelligence network, and the authority to act on her own recommendations rather than handing them off, and watching them carried out wrong by someone who had not understood them in the first place. She had braced for him to balk at the seat. It was the largest of the asks, the one most likely to put a dozen noses out of joint around a table that had been seated the same way for years. He did not balk. A council seat requires the council's acceptance, was all he gave her, turning his cup a quarter turn against the wood. You'll have to earn that yourself. Then, after a pause, she would come to recognize as the shape his honesty took. It won't take long. He was right about the work. He was wrong about how easy it would be. Earning a room is one thing when the room is merely skeptical. It is another thing entirely when a single person in it has already decided, before you have spoken one word, that you are a blade some enemy is holding by the handle. Her name was Malus. Senior advisor, 20 years at that table, gray-eyed and sharp, carrying the particular fierceness of a person who has bled for a thing and intends to go on bleeding for it if loyalty demands the price. From Celine's first morning in the chamber, Malus watched her the way a barnkeeper watches a lit lamp in a loft full of dry hay. For 3 weeks, it stayed at the level of looks, cold ones, across the briefing table. Celine let them land and refused to flinch, because flinching is a confession even when you have done nothing, and she had done nothing. Yet. Then, in her 4th week, the looks grew teeth. A bundle of papers vanished from the council archive. 3 days later, a trade contact in the Eastern settlement received a letter naming terms that only someone inside the inner circle could have known. Terms that had been sitting, plainly, inside the very satchel Celine had hauled across the river. And Malus rose in the middle of the morning council and said it to the whole room. She arrives from Blackthorn. Days later, our terms start walking east. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You don't need to be a scout to follow that track. Her eyes swung to Rydian, level, unafraid of him in the way that only 2 decades buys a person. She is exactly the gift a rival alpha sends. A clever woman. A tragic story. A bag full of other people's secrets. And we held the gate open and thanked her for arriving. The chamber went still, every face turning towards Celine like sunflowers tracking the worst possible sun. And the old crack beneath her ribs flared. Because she knew this exact vertigo, didn't she? The specific dizziness of being judged by a room that has never once asked for her account of herself. She had felt it a month ago in a green gown, while a man bit down on another woman's throat. The world, it seemed, kept a small repertoire and meant to make her watch it twice. She did not raise her voice either. The quietest thing in a room is frequently the thing the room ends up leaning forward to hear. "If I wanted this pack dead," she said, "I would not have handed you the map to do it with. I'd have kept the bag and sold it to the highest bidder, of which there would have been several." She turned her gaze full onto Malus. Not a challenge, but a door held open. "You're not wrong to be suspicious. Suspicion is your work, and you're plainly good at it. But you've aimed a good instinct at the wrong target. And while you keep it trained on me, the real leak goes on breathing comfortably in this room. Watching you do its labor for it, it was a good answer. It bought her nothing. Because suspicion, once it is loose in a room, does not pack up and leave merely because someone in the room proved clever. It digs in, it makes itself at home. Rydian did not throw her over the wall. He also did not clear her name, and that was the harder thing to sit inside of, the not being defended when she had half let herself expect it. What he said, to the whole council, was this: we don't punish on suspicion, and we don't ignore it. Both of those are roads packs die on. His eyes found Celine's. Find the leak. If it isn't you, prove it. If it is, I'll learn that anyway, and sooner than you'd care for. Fair. Unbearably fair. And fairness, she discovered, could become its own kind of pressure, because a cruel man hands you something to rage against, while a fair one only hands you the rope and asks, with perfect courtesy, whether you would prefer to hang yourself or climb. So that night, she wasted no hour feeling sorry. She had taken a room in the East Tower by then, a storage space before her, all dust and broken crates, which she had turned into something functional and bright, a place where a problem could be spread flat and stared at until it confessed. She spread the leak across the table and went at it the way she went at everything that frightened her. Backward, patiently, detail by detail, until the thing stopped being a fear and became a sequence she could follow. The leaked terms were real. She had already conceded that, but they were old. That was the seam. They came from a version of the Eastern Agreement that had been revised 8 months before she ever left Blackthorn, which meant whoever leaked them had not pulled them from her satchel at all. They had pulled them from Blackthorn, from the old files, from a hand still working inside the pack she had walked away from, which meant someone across the border was reaching all this distance to frame her. And to manage that, they had to know she had come here in the first place, which meant someone had been watching her since the night she rode out under the festival fires. She sat back from the table and felt the cold of that climb her spine one vertebra at a time. Being despised by a man who had stopped seeing her was one thing. That was only neglect curdled into cruelty, ordinary as milk left out. But being hunted by someone who had watched her leave, tracked her across a river, and laid a trap for her in a stranger's stronghold, that was attention. Sustained, deliberate, expensive attention. And no one spends that on a woman they believe is nothing. It took 3 weeks of careful letters to her old contacts to put a face to the watching. Garrick, Isolde's brother. When Kor claimed the girl in white, he had taken in her whole family the way an alpha does, and Garrick was the sort of man who could look at a pack's slow collapse and see, in place of a tragedy, a vacancy waiting to be filled. Here is what she assembled, letter by letter, in the lamplit hours. Garrick had wanted the claiming. He had spent months pouring poison into Kor's ear that Selene was a problem, too capable, too independent, a Luna who held more of the pack's true loyalty than the alpha himself. He had not done it for his sister's happiness. He had done it to clear Selene off the board, because as long as she stood at Kor's side, building and holding and quietly running everything, there was no room in Blackthorn for a man like Garrick to climb, and now he had a second board to clear. Because he had worked out, faster than Kor had in 3 years of marriage, exactly what Selene was. A woman who could raise a kingdom from nothing, and he could not abide her raising one for somebody else, somewhere beyond his reach. So he was doing the next best thing to killing her, poisoning the ground beneath her feet, feeding old files across the border, dressing her up as the snake, hoping the new pack would do the murder for him and spare him the river crossing. He wanted both packs weakened. He wanted her erased from each. She sat with that a long while, the fire gone to embers, the valley black past the narrow window. She had believed her enemy was a broken-hearted past, a man who had looked through her until she walked. It turned out her true enemy was a man who had looked at her too hard and too early, and been so frightened of what he saw that he had built a years-long campaign around her removal. Strange, to be hunted not for being small, but for being dangerous. There was a grim flattery in it she chose not to examine, because flattery from a man trying to destroy you is a poisoned cup, and she had drunk from one of those already this year. She brought the proof to Rydian, not to the council, to him in the high library, gray light coming amber through the narrow glass, a low fire muttering in the grate. She laid it out as she laid everything out, the revised dates, the old files. The pattern of the leaks which followed her contacts like a fox, following a scent line, and the single thread that tied it all back to one hand across the border. He read it through. Slowly, the whole of him bent to it. Then he looked up. "Malus won't take this from you," he said, flat and accurate. "She'll say you built it to clear yourself, and half the council will agree because they want to. I know, so we don't bring it from you." He set the pages down with a care that was its own kind of respect. "We give Malus the thread, and we let her pull it herself." Selene blinked and nearly laughed, because it was so exactly right. It edged toward elegant. The most stubborn enemy in the room transformed into the most credible witness in it, simply by letting her discover the truth with her own 2 hands, rather than having it pressed on her by the woman she distrusted. "You'd hand your fiercest advisor the credit," she said. "For work I did." The corner of his mouth moved, almost nothing. "Credit isn't a thing I collect, it's a tool. And right now it does more good in her hands than in yours. A beat. Lifting a person's name off their own work is theft. Handing someone a name they earned for themselves is leadership. Most men confuse the two, and it's why most packs are poorer than they should be." She looked at him a moment longer than she meant to. She had stood beside a man for 3 years who lifted her name off everything and stamped his own into the wax. And here sat a man who would give a victory away on purpose, to someone else, because it served the pack and cost him only a pride he apparently did not bother keeping. The two of them laid side by side in a single afternoon. It was almost rude how cleanly the comparison drew itself, but Garrick was not a patient man, and he was not finished, and he moved his largest piece before they could spring the snare. The mountain pass, her crown, the route she had been quietly reopening for the new pack, working the same 4 clan leaders who had once trusted her under another banner. Garrick reached them first. He sent word to the high passes, a forged letter, under a seal he had no right to and had somehow gotten his hands on, stuffed with insults and broken promises, pitched precisely at the old grievances she had spent 2 years soothing. By the time her own messenger climbed to the passes, 2 of the 4 clan leaders had gone cold. The deal that would have secured the whole winter, the deal that would have proven, at last, that the gamble of her was a gamble worth making, was crumbling in her open hands. The timing could not have been crueler. Malus had not yet pulled the thread. In the eyes of half that council, Selene was still the spy in the green dress, and now the spy's flagship arrangement was falling to pieces. To a frightened room, that does not look like coincidence. It looks like proof. The outsider reached too far. The outsider failed. The outsider was precisely what we feared, and we let her near the winter stores. This was the low point, lower in its own way than the festival had been, Under those torches, she had lost a man, and a man can be grieved and set down. Here she stood to lose the things she had bled to rebuild from nothing. Her name, her work, the narrow shelf of trust she had carved out one answered question at a time. She sat in the East Tower that night and felt the old animal grief stir, and beneath it a voice, the cruelest she owned, the one that spoke very reasonably and very gently. Perhaps you don't get to build things. Perhaps you only get to lose them. Again and again, in nicer and nicer rooms, until the rooms run out. She set a firm hand on that voice the way she had set it on her wolf at the river. Not yet. Not you. Then she did the only thing she had ever fully trusted. She went back to the work. She had built those clan relationships out of trust, one conversation at a time, across years. And real trust, the kind earned slowly, does not die of a single forged letter. It bends, it turns wary, but it remembers. A forgery is loud, a reputation is long. She bet her whole new life on the second outlasting the first. She rode for the high passes herself. No retinue, no banner, just a woman, a gray mare, and the cold, climbing toward 4 people who needed to look her in the eye. She sat across from the eldest clan leader in a stone hall thick with peat smoke. A woman as hard and patient as the mountain she ruled, and Celine did not defend herself. She laid the forged letter on the table between them. She pointed to the seal, the wrong weight in the wax, the phrasing no hand from this pack would ever choose. And then she said the thing that turned it, in a voice with nothing in it but the plain truth. You've known my word 5 years now, across 2 packs and a border. Has it once been false? She let the silence answer before she went on. Someone is using my name to break what we built together. So the question isn't whether you trust the pack at my back. It's whether you trust me. You always have. Nothing about me has changed. Only the people willing to forge my name to get at what I've made. The clan leader was quiet a long while. The fire popped. Somewhere a goat complained at the cold. No, she said at last. Your word has never been false, and she put her broad hand flat on the table, palm down, the old gesture of a bargain kept. The pass stays open, but not for your pack, for you. As it was always for you. Celine rode back down through the snow with the deal alive again in her satchel, and her breath smoking in the dark, and something in her chest that was not quite triumph, because triumph was too clean a word for it. It was nearer to vindication. The narrow, hard-won vindication of a person who has been told she is nothing, and just been handed written proof, sealed by someone who has known her for years, that she is the precise opposite. She rode straight into the thing she had not braced for. She returned to find the council already in session. Garrick's framing had done its slow work. Malis was pressing for her removal, then and there, and heads were nodding around the table. The easy nods of people, relieved to have a villain who is not one of their own, and Rydian was standing in front of all of them. She heard his voice through the door before she touched it. You want her gone for a deal you've decided she lost. I'll wait. When she stepped through, snow still melting off her shoulders, the signed agreement in her hand, he did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had set his weight on a plank and was watching it hold. She laid the agreement on the table, the pass. Secured, in writing, sealed by the clan's own hands. The room went silent in an entirely different key than before. And then Rydian did the thing that rearranged something permanent in her. He did not crow. He did not take a slow lap around the table or remind Malis whose judgment had just been proven. He turned to the full council and said, simply, this is Celine's work, not the council's recommendation, not mine, hers. I want every wolf at this table to remember her name when the snows come and the stores hold and your children eat. Such a small thing on its face, a name spoken aloud, in the right room. It was everything 3 years of marriage had never once handed her, and the size of that absence, measured against the smallness of the thing, now filling it, nearly took her legs out from under her. You do not learn the true dimensions of a hunger until someone, without ceremony, sets a plate in front of you, and you realize how long you had been pretending you were not starving. Later, when the council had emptied, Malis stayed behind. The old advisor stood a long moment at the cold end of the table, then said, gruffly, looking somewhere past Celine's shoulder, I was wrong about you. A pause that cost her visibly. I'm not often wrong. It sits badly. Then help me be right about something. No gloating. Celine had learned what gloating costs, and it was never worth the price. There's still a hand across the border feeding you forgeries with my name on them. I've got the thread. You've got 20 years of credibility I'll never have here. Pull it. And let's put him out of business together. For the first time, Malis looked at her as something other than a threat. Not warmth, exactly, but the clean regard of one professional sizing up another and finding the arithmetic acceptable. Show me, she said, and so an unlikely partnership began. The kind that only forms when pride finally steps aside and lets survival take the reins. The fierce old advisor who had wanted Celine thrown over the wall, and the exiled Luna who had stood judged before the whole chamber, now bent over the same papers late into the same nights, two sharp women tracing the same poison back toward its source. Celine kept Melis at the center of it, deliberately letting her find the matches, letting her be the one to say the names aloud. Because a claim from the outsider was doubted, and a claim from Melis was law, and Celine had no further interest in being doubted when she could simply hand the credit to a voice the room already trusted. It was the very lesson Redian had taught her in the library, repaid forward. She was getting good at the trick of it. It was the High Library, weeks into that strange new alliance, where she finally understood she was in trouble of a different species. They were fighting about a treaty, an old one, predating them both, with maddening, ambiguous language around river rights that had gone suddenly relevant when a neighbor pack began pushing south. She leaned across the long table to stab a finger at the clause in question, and he read it over her shoulder and said something about her interpretation that was wrong. Actually wrong, not merely differently right. The language was plain if you had spent any time with the original codex. She turned to tell him so, and found his face a hand's breadth from hers. He did not move back, and this was the trouble. This was the whole of the trouble. Neither did she. There was a half-second where the argument simply stopped, like a clock wound down mid-tick, and she became horribly, specifically aware of his eyes. That gray-green she had no good word for, looking at her at close range with an expression that had nothing whatsoever to do with river rights. She stepped back, found the codex, found the passage, showed it to him with a composed professional calm she was, given the circumstances, rather proud of. He read it. "You're right, I know." The corner of his mouth did its small thing again, and she refused, on principle, to look at it. But here is what no one watching would have seen. She had been burned so thoroughly that she had rebuilt herself with thicker walls without ever deciding to, the way a body lays down scar over a wound. Automatic, ungraceful, functional. The scar was not pretty, but it held, and she was not remotely ready to examine what might still be living beneath it. Because the last time she had let someone all the way in, she had ended up watching him claim a stranger before 1,000 cheering witnesses. And a woman needs to learn that lesson only once to respect the part of herself that flinches. So she managed the new trouble the way she managed every persistent inconvenience. She noted it, accepted that it existed, and went back to the work, which had never once looked through her, which gave back exactly what she put in. Except, and this was the part that truly unsettled her, more than Garrick, more than the council. This time, the work and the man were not fighting over her. At Blackthorn, she had always been forced to choose, be seen as a woman, or be valued for her mind, be wanted at the dinner, or be needed in the council. Never both, never at once, and she had made her peace with the trade the way you make peace with a limp. But Rydian did not pull her away from the work. He did the work beside her, pointed at the same maps, argued the same clauses, lost the same sleep, and never once acted as though her competence were a thing he had to forgive her for. She had spent 3 years believing that choice was a law of nature, and here, in a cold library, with a former enemy tracing forgeries down the hall and a winter newly secured, she was starting to suspect it had only ever been the most one particular man had thought to give her. Not the most she could have. It frightened her more than any forged letter, because if it was true, then the bargain she had called hard and brave had only ever been a small life dressed up as the only one on offer. Grieving a marriage was survivable. She had nearly finished the job. But grieving the years she had spent calling a cage a reasonable arrangement was a colder, longer grief, and only now, with the door standing wide, could she see clearly the bars she had been living behind. She stood in the library a moment after he had gone, the fire low, the treaty open on the table with her ink and his side by side on the same page. She let herself feel, for one breath, the enormous and frightening lightness of a woman beginning to understand she had been worth more all along than the price she had agreed to be sold at. Then she picked up the codex, went to find Melis, and got back to the work of burning a liar out of 2 packs at once. 2 years went by, and not the slow grinding way you would expect of a life assembled out of wreckage. They went fast, dense, stacked with the core work that makes the months disappear because every hour of it counts toward something real. The leak got sealed first. Melis pulled the thread herself, exactly as the plan required, and followed it hand over hand across the border until it ended where Celine had always known it would. She carried the proof to the council with the cold fury of a woman who cannot stand being made into anyone's instrument, and Garrick's whole network inside the stronghold was carved out at the root in a single afternoon. From that day, Malis defended Celine's name to anyone who would hold still long enough to hear it. Loud, blunt, relentless, the way a person defends a thing only after they have been wrong about it once, and the kingdom grew. 3 smaller packs came in under the banner, including one that had feuded with it for 2 generations and required 6 months of patient, brutal negotiation that Celine led herself. 2 trading houses that had refused them for a decade began sending regular envoys. The winter stores filled to the rafters for the first time in living memory. The same council that had once watched her like a hazard now argued her proposals in rooms she was not even seated in, which she found, each time she heard of it, quietly hilarious, and somewhere in the rich, crowded middle of that second year, in the South Garden after a council had emptied out. She said something that made Redian laugh, a real one, unguarded, the kind that knocked 10 years off his face and made him look like a man instead of a fortress. She had been working to draw that laugh out of him for weeks, without admitting it to herself, filing away what amused him, testing small approaches, and when it finally landed, it was more satisfying than she had budgeted for. The laugh faded. He was looking at her. She was looking back. He said her name once, low, the way you say a word whose weight you are checking, and she closed the distance, which surprised exactly no one watching except herself. It was nothing like the things she had known before. No urgency to claim, no audience, no teeth, no ceremony, no 1,000 witnesses howling approval at the precise moment a life ended. Only 2 people in a cold garden, choosing. When he pulled back, his hand was along her jaw and his voice had gone rough. I've been trying not to do that for longer than I'd like to admit, I know. I was timing you, timing me, seeing how long the patience would hold, a beat. It's considerable. It had started to feel like a personal challenge, and the last of the scar tissue around the old wound shifted. Did not vanish. Scars do not, and she had stopped expecting them to, but resettled into something she could carry without it pulling at her with every step. They did not rush after that night. No grand announcement. He simply began saying Celine and I in council where he had once said I, and the pack, which had watched her earn every inch of her place, treated it as the most ordinary fact in the world. Because by then, it was. It was into the middle of the best year of her life that the letter came. It arrived from the south bearing a seal she recognized before her mind had finished forming the word for it. The blackthorn wolf's head, pressed into dark wax. She read it alone in the east tower, the autumn light going thin and pale around her. Cor's hand. She would know it anywhere. She had folded it into more envelopes than she could count, back when his handwriting had lived inside her own house. The pack was failing, he wrote. The trade had collapsed. She knew this already. Had watched it from a distance with a feeling that was not satisfaction, but stood somewhere in its neighborhood. He needed to speak with her. The last line. I made a mistake. I know that doesn't touch what I did, but you should know I think about it every day. She read it twice, set it on the windowsill, and let herself feel the whole tangled truth of what it held, not pushing it down, not performing serenity over it, only sitting with the strange weather of it as it moved through her. Then she took it to Redian, all of it, and watched him read, and he did not tell her what to do, which would have been the easy thing and the wrong one. He said only, whatever you decide, I'm beside you in it, not behind. Beside, one word, set down like a stone she could stand on, telling her again the entire distance between the 2 men she had been measured against. Cor arrived at winter's end, when the ridge road had churned to cold mud. She felt him before the gate watch sent word, that old bone-deep recognition she had never fully silenced, the faint ash of a bond that should have been ended cleanly and never was, present like a scar that aches before rain. She walked to the courtyard. 2 of the border guards were bringing him through the gate. He had come without a retinue, just Cor and 2 horses, and the look of a man who has spent most of his pride simply getting himself to where he is standing. He looked older, not in years, but in weight. What surprised her, watching him cross the muddy ground, was how little of her his presence touched. She had braced for the old pull, half expected the body to betray the mind, to remember what the heart had finished mourning. It did not come. What came instead was a clean, almost clinical distance, like standing across a valley from a house you grew up in, recognizing every window, feeling none of the wish to walk back inside. Celine, Cor, she did not soften it. She did not sharpen it either. Come in. We'll talk. She chose the plain receiving room, the one kept for trade with strangers, not the council hall, not the library, nothing that belonged to her actual life here. He took the inventory an alpha always takes as he sat. The quality of the stone, the standard of the work, the unmistakable competence threaded through every small detail of a place that is well and truly run. She watched him understand what this was. What she had made, you built this, not an accusation, closer to awe, and beneath it, the first faint sound of a man reckoning with the size of his own mistake. Rydian and I built it. Together, his jaw tightened a fraction. She marked it and let it pass. Blackthorn is dying, he said, and it cost him to say the word plainly. The networks, the contacts, the roots, gone. Isolde's family took the accounts after you left. They never understood what you'd built, or how it held together. Inside 8 months, half our partners had walked. The pass closed entirely. She had known all of it, contact by contact from a distance, and what she had felt watching it crumble had never been triumph. She had not wanted them to suffer. She had wanted to stop suffering herself, which is a different animal entirely, though the two get confused by people who have never had to tell them apart. What do you need? She said. A trade agreement. Access to the pass. Fair terms. We've got timber, stone, fighters. We're not begging charity. We're asking for a working relationship. She listened to all of it, asked 4 clarifying questions, which he answered with more honesty than she had expected from him. And then she gave him the truth of how it would go. I'll bring it to the council. And to Rydian. If the terms hold up, there's likely something we can work with. But you'll deal with this pack as a whole. Through our process. Our people. Not through any leftover loyalty to me, she held his eyes. That loyalty fed Blackthorn for 3 years. It doesn't transfer. I'm done being one woman a whole kingdom leans on for free. I learned where that road ends. It ends with a man walking out a gate one night and his pack starving by spring. He went quiet, absorbing the shape of it, and that was the precise moment the gate tower bell began to ring. Not the slow toll of a visitor announced, but the fast, hammering rhythm of an alarm. She was on her feet before the second strike. Core 2 old instinct, an alpha's body answering a war bell before the mind catches up. A guard came through the door at a dead run, breathless. The east stores, a fire, and riders at the lower gate claiming the pack's own seal, demanding the council open to them. Her blood went to ice because she knew that move. She had watched its smaller cousins for 2 years. A forged seal, a diversion. An attack timed for the exact hour the alpha's attention is split 3 ways, and the household's eyes are all turned toward a guest. Garrick, cut out of the stronghold, yes. Never cut out of his ambition. He had simply waited, the way patient and rotten men wait, and chosen this hour. His old enemy's old mate riding south, the whole household's gaze swung toward the curiosity at the plain table. To throw his final piece onto the board. Burn the stores, force the gate. Seize in the chaos what he could never take in daylight. And then Core did the thing she had not seen coming. He stepped forward, pale, the name coming out of him like something he had been ashamed to carry. Garrick. It's Garrick, he swallowed hard. He's been in my ear since before the festival. I see it now, all of it. He told me you were a threat. He pushed me toward Isolde. He's been writing letters under himself for 2 years that I never sent and never knew about. His hands had curled into fists at his sides. I came here half for trade. And half because I finally understood the man rotting my pack from the inside was the same man who put me on that platform. I have his letters, the real ones, the originals. In my saddlebag, she stared at him. Because the man who had broken her had just, without meaning to, handed her the one weapon that could save the home she had broken toward. Core's letters, Garrick's true correspondence, the names of his contacts, the timing of his moves, the source of his coin, were the exact missing half of the case Malus had built for 2 years. The hand that had stamped her name onto a betrayal was now holding out the proof to clear 2 kingdoms of the man behind it. There was no time to stand inside the strangeness of it. She turned to the guard, those letters. Out of his saddlebag, to Mele, now. Run, she turned to Rydian, who had appeared in the doorway already armed. The riders at the gate are noise. The fire is noise. He wants the council chamber. That's where the seals are kept, where the Alliance records live. Hold the gate, but put your real strength on the chamber. He doesn't want the stronghold. He wants the proof of who we are, so he can wear it. Rydian did not question her for a heartbeat. That was what trust bought. Speed, when speed was the whole game. Done, he said, and was gone. What came next came fast, the way real catastrophe always does, leaving the slow understanding of it for afterward. Garrick's men found the council chamber held 3 deep, where they had expected it empty, because the woman who had mapped every trade route in 2 packs had also, quietly, across 100 sleepless nights, mapped every weak point in her own home, asking the question every real builder asks. If I wanted to take this place, how would I do it, and what would I set in the way? The fire at the stores caught early and died young, because 2 winters back she had insisted on water lines that everyone had called an extravagance, and no one had thanked her for. And the forged seal at the gate fooled no one, because Malus, who by now knew Garrick's hand better than any soul alive, stood at that gate with his own true letters in her grip, matching the wax in the torchlight and calling out each match for every wolf within earshot to witness. Garrick had built his entire life on one belief, that a clever man takes what builders make. He had never understood the single thing Celine had learned the night her old life ended, that you cannot steal what someone has woven into the bones of a place. You can only raise something of your own, and he never had. He had spent his cleverness on theft, and his theft on more cleverness, and the first time the builders simply stood together, the whole architecture of him came down, because there was nothing underneath it but appetite. They took him at the lower gate, without a single death on their side. When it was over, the bell gone silent, the stores saved, Garrick in iron, she stood in the grey courtyard at the edge of dawn and noticed her hands were perfectly still. She had wondered, 2 years before, whether they would ever stop shaking. They had, somewhere along the way, while she was not watching. Healing finishes its work in private and rarely sends word ahead. She went out to look at him before they took him down, because she felt she had earned that much. To see, with her own eyes, the man who had tried twice to erase her from the world. He was so much smaller than the shadow she had assigned him, sharp-faced, furious. A man dwarfed by his own ambitions, he looked at her with pure hatred. You think you've won. You're still just a borrowed knife. They'll use you up and toss you. Same as the last one did. She looked back at him a long, calm moment and gave him the truest thing she owned. No, the difference is that here, my name sits on my own work. You spent a whole life learning to take what other people make. You never learned to make anything. So the moment the makers stood shoulder to shoulder, you had nothing left to take. Because taking was all you ever were. Now everyone knows it too. She did not say it cruelly. She said it the way you read a verdict. Then she turned and walked back inside and did not give him another thought, because some people are a chapter and some are a footnote, and she had decided long ago which one he would be in the book of her life. She found Cor where she had left him, in the plain receiving room. He had not run. He had stayed. He had handed over the letters and then waited, like a man standing at the foot of a debt he finally meant to pay. You could have let it burn, he said quietly. Use the fire. Let my pack rot from a safe distance. You'd have had every right. I never wanted your pack to burn. She let it land flat and true. That was always the part you couldn't see about me. I don't run on revenge. I never did. It burns hot, gets you nowhere, and leaves you cold at the end of it. He was quiet. Then he did the hard thing, the thing he had ridden all that mud to do. What I did on that platform, he stopped. Started again. I've turned it over every day since. I knew you were the most capable person in my life. I got so used to it I stopped seeing you as a person at all. You became weather, furniture, the thing that was simply always there. I let you give your work to me and I signed my name to it, and I never once asked what that cost you, because it cost me nothing. His voice cracked on the last of it. I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't rebuild a thing. I just needed you to know that I know exactly what I did, and exactly what I lost. The room was very still. She looked at the man she had loved for 3 years, the face she had once been able to draw with her eyes shut, and let herself feel the full weight of it without flinching away. She had come to understand that armoring yourself against feeling is not strength. It is only a different way of staying small, I believe you, she said because she did. The regret was real, and she had read faces her whole life, and I forgave you. Not lately, a long time ago, not for your sake, for mine. Because I had a life to build and I couldn't carry a stone that heavy while my hands were full of mortar. He let out a breath that sounded older than the conversation. I'm not coming back. Warm. Level. No cruelty in it, and no door left ajar either. Not to Blackthorn. Not to you. Not because I hate you, I don't, and I think that surprises me more than it does you, but because I'm not the woman who left that night. I've been someone else for 2 years. And she's the one I intend to stay, he nodded slowly. Then, the thing she had not expected. Rydian, he's good to you. She let herself smile, fully, the first time in his presence. He's better than good. He built me a seat at his council before he knew whether I'd stay long enough to sit in it. He has never once put his name on a thing I made. You understand now why that matters. I can see that you do. And I think understanding it, here, in this room, across from me, is the hardest thing you've done in a long while, he understood. She could see the cost of it move across his face. The trade agreement, he said, pulling himself back to solid ground because the ground of feeling had nearly taken him under. You'll really consider it, I will. If the terms are fair, I'll argue for them. I've no interest in Blackthorn's suffering. The pact did nothing to me. A pause waited. You did. But this goes through the council, through our process. I bring it as the pact's interest, or I don't bring it at all. He stood. She stood. At the door he paused. That old habit of his, the hesitation at thresholds she had once found endearing and now simply remembered, the way you remember a song you no longer sing. You're happy, he said. Not a question. He had always had that one reliable gift, the reading of her, even when he had used it for nothing. Yes, I am. I'm glad. That's the truth, whatever else is. I'm glad, I know. Go home, Cor. Try to build something this time. It's harder than taking. It's also the only thing that lasts. She waited until his footsteps faded down the corridor. Then she walked toward the library, where the amber light spilled warm under the door. The glow of a room with someone still working in it at this hour. Someone who found his quiet satisfaction in the keeping of a kingdom rather than the performance of having built one. She pushed the door open. Rydian looked up from the long table, the same table where they fought and planned and made the thing they were making, and his face did what it always did when she came into a room. A plain, unguarded ease, like a held breath he had not known he was holding, letting go. How did it go? She crossed to him. He pushed his chair back to make her room, and she sat on the table's edge, close enough that their shoulders touched, and he covered her hand with his, warm, unhurried. Exactly what I expected, she said, and lighter than I feared. He turned her hand over, ran a thumb across her knuckles. And? She looked at the map between them, her small, precise notes laid alongside his larger, angular ones, 2 years of shared work in 2 hands' worth of ink. At the kingdom out the dark window, lit along the ridge, alive and theirs. And I'm here, she said. Outside, the last cold rain was turning to snow, the first of the season, settling clean and soundless over everything they had raised from stubbornness and early mornings, the way permanence settles not in one dramatic fall, but as the patient accumulation of ordinary days. 3 corridors off, Cor sat in a guest room, hoping for trade terms. Far to the south, on a blackthorn gate railing, a silver clasp had long since rusted through, and none of it reached her anymore, because she had built something at last that could not be taken. And the man who had tried to break her had ridden all that way, hat in hand, to ask whether she would be generous enough to do business with what she had become. She would be. She could afford to be. She had become the kind of woman who could afford almost anything. That is where Celine's story comes to rest. But before you go, sit with what it leaves behind, because her story is not only hers, it belongs to anyone who has ever been overlooked, undervalued, or quietly written out of a life they held together with both hands. Her strength was never that she did not bleed. She bled deeply, for a long time, in a tower where no one could watch. The strength was in what she did with her hands while she was still bleeding. She kept building, not because the pain had stopped, but because she refused to let the worst night of her life cast the deciding vote on every night that came after. If you are in the middle of your own worst night as you hear this, hold to that. The hurt is not proof that you are weak. It is proof that you are still alive enough to begin again. And notice this, too. The cruelest thing Cor ever did was not the betrayal under the torches. It was the long, quiet erasure that came before it, the slow forgetting to see the person who carried his whole world. Most of the harm in this life is not done by villains who announce themselves. It is done by ordinary people who stop paying attention, who assume there will always be more time, who treat the most loyal soul in the room as the safest one to neglect, precisely because that soul has never given them reason to worry. So look around your own life tonight. Find the person who quietly holds the thing that would fall apart without them, and tell them, plainly, that you see them, before they have to ride out a gate in the dark to find out whether anyone ever did. It makes you wonder how often we walk past someone and decide we already understand them. How often we stand in the silent crowd, watching a person be unmade, and choose the small, cowardly comfort of looking away instead of being the one who turns and truly looks and says the only sentence that has ever changed anything: I see what you are, and your story is not over. So tell me in the comments. Have you ever been the one who did everything and got none of the credit? Or have you walked away from something that had stopped deserving you and built something better on the far side of the leaving? A sentence, a word, whatever you have. Because someone scrolling past in the middle of their own dark night may need to read that it can turn, that you got out, that you rebuilt. And if Celine's story moved something in you, send it to the one person you know who needs to hear that walking away has never once been the same thing as losing. Especially the parts of your own story that no one ever clapped for. Especially those.